We are now days away from knowing more about Ottawa's vision for Canada in the age of artificial intelligence. Last week, the Prime Minister told reporters that the federal government's AI strategy will be released in the week ahead. This after new consultations and repeated delays. Joining us now is Lisa Strug, University of Toronto professor and director of U of T's Data Sciences Institute. Professor, it's good to speak with you today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Right, before we talk about this upcoming announcement, may I ask you to give us a sense of where things stand at the moment when it comes to AI policy and regulation in Canada?
Sure, my pleasure. Well, Canada currently does not have a comprehensive binding federal legislation that's specific to AI. So the proposed Artificial Intelligence and Data Act introduced by the Trudeau government died in January 2025 when Parliament was prorogued following the political transition. So instead, the private sector is really governed by a patchwork of existing privacy and human rights laws, voluntary codes, and provincial regulation around hiring, for example. And so when coming into office, Prime Minister Carney established a Minister of Artificial Intelligence and Digital Innovation, which is Evan Solomon. And there were strict rules in place for the public sector, I would add. But Solomon launched the AI Strategy Task Force alongside a national sprint public consultation. They called it a national sprint because it happened over a few months in this past fall. And it was intended to develop a refreshed national artificial intelligence strategy and guide the replacement for this lapsed Artificial Intelligence Data Act. And the refreshed strategy is really hoping to balance commercial productivity and safety in a framework that's consultative. So Kearney, as you mentioned, announced last week that the administration's fully refreshed National Artificial Intelligence Strategy is going to be officially released soon. And that strategy is really built on 6 foundational pillars, ranging from safeguarding democracy to building sovereign computational infrastructure and retaining AI talent.
In fact, as you're pointing out, just to summarize then, in the absence of this comprehensive, fully enacted federal law, businesses and governments have essentially been relying on existing privacy laws as well as that voluntary code of conduct that you mentioned. We've spoken to businesses about this as well, and that particularly is important when it comes to generative AI. So is it fair to say at this point, people are essentially doing what they can, businesses are doing what they can, they're making it up as they go along because they have to, evolve with this evolving technology, even in the absence of regulation?
Yes, I mean, I would note that there are strict rules in place for the public sector, but you're absolutely correct in terms of the private sector, where it really is a patchwork of existing privacy and human rights laws and voluntary codes. There have been provinces that have really stepped up in this area as well to govern AI technology, but there is no comprehensive binding federal legislation right now, and that's what we're waiting for.
Right now, the Prime Minister says we can expect that, a national AI strategy this week. They did announce, as you pointed out, those 6 pillars that will support this strategy. What will you be looking for in this announcement?
Yeah, well, if we look back, a major turning point for the improvement of AI systems like large language models was discovering that larger models combined with more data and more compute improved performance. So there's been an emphasis on acquiring more compute and data and attracting and retaining AI talent. But if we want safer, fair, more reliable models across the full spectrum of applications and broad access and implementation, then what we really need is high quality, well-linked, trustworthy data, and to entrain and engage the full data science workforce. So what do I mean by that? That the talent that is needed is broader than just AI engineers. We need statisticians who understand uncertainty and bias and who's included in the data. We need data engineers who build pipelines and infrastructure and data stewards who govern access and ethics. We can't forget domain experts in health, environment, education, indigenous governance, labor, and the public sector, of course, these analysts who work with administrative and population data. So the broad ecosystem is really what converts compute into productive, trustworthy, socially valuable AI. And so a couple things that I'm looking for are really, I want to see the AI talent that we want to attract and retain be defined really broadly and include the full AI workforce. And I also want to see access to training for all Canadians, and that training provides the full skill set to roll out AI in all sectors of the economy and public service.
Very interesting. So what you're describing is essentially a more holistic approach. I hope that's a fair way to summarize it. How important is it for the federal government to get this right? What are the stakes here?
Yeah, I mean, the stakes are pretty high. AI performance and national competitiveness depend on human expertise in the data sciences, on data and its its quality. And we really have an opportunity to capitalize on our strengths in these areas. But today in Canada, data constraints remain significant. Many firms lack staff to prepare data for AI. Public sector data remains siloed and it's really difficult to access. So without emphasizing data governance, and data science, the investments won't realize the goal of the refresh strategy, which was to balance productivity and safety.
Where would you say Canada stands at the moment? Is it a fair assessment to say that we're lagging behind in the absence of a framework?
I think it's definitely important that we have this framework, and it is difficult to move forward and plan without a framework. But it is very important to get it right, and we can't forget, I think, about the data governance that makes the data accessible and the people that make the data useful. That's the basis of equitable, fair, reliable AI systems, and so we have to get it right. But yeah, it needs to come soon.
All right, just as a final point while we have you, Lisa, do you have thoughts on how this federal strategy might interact with those provincial laws you mentioned? Because, again, it is in the absence of a federal framework maybe that this has happened, but we've increasingly been seeing provinces take matters into their own hands. Provincial courts have really been where these differences are being decided. Do you expect that there'll be any sort of conflict there once we get that framework?
No, I think that there is a pillar in the strategy about coordination internationally and at home, and I'm sure that message will continue with the provincial governments as well.
All right, it's evolving technology, and it is hard always for governments to keep up with it. It's challenging as well. It's changed in just the last 2 years, but we leave it there for now. Lisa, thanks so much for sharing your thoughts with us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
That is Lisa Strug of the University of Toronto.